Welcome to Live Happy, Eat Dirty, a podcast full of quick and dirty health and diet ideas for real people, hosted by me, Kate Harrison. Keep listening for the latest weird and wonderful ideas and interviews from the worlds of psychology, nutrition and more. If you loathe detoxes and clean eating, but love evidence-based tips and eating well, you're in the right place. Because you can be slim without giving up cheese, you can be fit without ever trying a triathlon, and you can enjoy your life without having to be a saint. Ditch the guilt. A happy, dirty life is so much more fun. Here's today's show. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today's is rather different to the usual. It's a very personal recording. I'm going to talk about my mum, my own journey around weight, and why I think the government needs to act now to help all of us stay a healthy weight. Plus, I'm going to reveal something many of you don't know about me at the end, so keep listening. I would love to hear what you think. My fasting journey started 6 years ago on the 9th of August 2012. I was, as I've said in many previous podcasts and books, overweight, fed up, worried about my health. I'd seen the programme about intermittent fasting, but I was really unsure about whether it would work for me. So, well, you know the rest of the story, probably. It did work for me. I am 6 years on now, and I am still a healthy weight, and I still fast once or twice a week, as well as advising lots of people on how to do it and why they should. But on the exact day that it was 6 years on since my first fastiversary, that's last week as I record this, I was actually talking about my mum at her funeral. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it, but I did. I was trying to talk about how we leave so many things behind when we die. So many of the things that we've touched, some of the things we've made, the connections we've made, the physical things we've done and achieved. I was with my mum when she died, and that was after many years of suffering due to a whole range of complex illnesses. The whole family were there, and a couple of weeks later, me and my sister both planned to say some words at the service. Despite fearing we wouldn't finish, we did manage it, and I hope she would have been proud of both of us. In the days since she died, I've been thinking a lot about meaning and the legacies we leave behind. And as my fastiversary coincided with this, I wanted to try to make more sense of what it means for us as we focus on weight, something apparently self-centered, but actually important because we all want to be around and healthy for as long as we possibly can be. The suffering that my mum had to endure was actually a key reason for me beginning to want to find a way to lose weight permanently. Mum had a couple of different cancers, and she also suffered with diabetes and cardiovascular complications like stroke. My mum wanted to be a nurse from her childhood. She was treated in hospital for appendicitis at age 12, and she said that she met two lads when she was in hospital who had cystic fibrosis, and when she came out she stayed in touch with them, but unfortunately there was nothing that could be done for them longer term. The treatments were a lot less developed than they are these days, and they died, and she decided that she wanted to nurse to help children like them. She loved her nurse training, I think. I have many photographs of her during that time. She made a difference to a lot of people, but nursing in those days wasn't always the healthiest of profession. Like a lot of young women in the 50s, 60s and 70s, she became a real smoker, and it was something that she did until very late in her life. She also had a real roller coaster journey with her weight, a bit like me. It went up and down during her lifetime, and I know that as a wartime baby, which she was, she grew up surrounded by rationing, and I think that led to her craving of sweet things. I described her during the funeral about the many smells that went with her, and they were the baking of her amazing lemon meringue pie, but also that scent of Benson and Hedges. The positive thing about mum's smoking, of course, was that my sister and I grew up very, very determined not to be smokers ourselves, which obviously has benefited our health longer term. Also, like almost all women I know, at a few points in her life, Mum had issues with mental health, in her case depression, which is something that I've suffered as well. Who knows whether that's down to our life experiences or our genetic inheritance? Probably both. I inherited Mum's thick, glossy hair and also her youthful skin, though her skin, I have to say, when she died was probably better than mine because of the Nivea she applied nightly. In my case, I suffered a lot of bouts of sunburn as a young adult, and I'm paying the price now. I believe, though, that many of the weight and health issues we suffer are related to our mental health, and particularly to the issues we might have with a lack of self-care or self-love at times. And I think that does connect to why diets often don't work for people, especially for those of us with long-term weight issues. We might have emotional issues around feeding and around eating the wrong kind of things. And so it's not as simple as just saying, eat less, exercise more. There are fundamental things about us that mean that's a very difficult thing to achieve long term. What does work, I think, though, is finding strategies to help you manage the reasons you might do things that help or don't help your health. And the reasons for me fall into two main categories. They're internal and external. And internal are the thoughts and the drives that lead us to behave as we do, including what we eat, what we say, even who we love. In the case of food, it could be emotions, it could be hunger hormones, childhood memories of food, responses to stress. The external reasons are really the environment, which is everything from how much money we have, the hours we work, the food that's available, and especially these days, the marketing and adverts we see, even down to the layout of the shop where we buy our food. The strategies that can help us lose weight long term act on both of those. So when it comes to internal reasons, they can help us to understand our behaviour. It really can help if we understand why tiredness might make us order a takeaway rather than make a salad at home at the end of a long day, or why sadness that you might be feeling could make you want to comfort yourself with cakes or chocolate or crisps, those foods that might have comforted you as a child. Once you can understand what's causing some of those drives to make us do things that aren't healthy behaviour, you can look for ways around those. So mental strategies could be finding an alternative to food to dealing with stress, like picking up a really good book or a magazine, doing a bit of exercise, listening to some favourite music, or they might include stocking the fridge with some alternative foods which are a lot more nourishing and help us with our longer term aim, which is to be healthy and happy. Strategies can also help with the external. So fasting for me is a way that I'm able to turn away from some of those numerous pressures to eat, whether it's a catchy advert, the display of rich foods in the local shop, or somebody who likes me and cares about me urging me to treat myself or just have a little piece of this. 1 or 2 days a week, I can focus on other things and I feel lighter and brighter for it because it shows I can do it. I can resist some of those foods which might look great at the time, but probably won't benefit my longer term health. I've talked a lot about how with fasting, after a fasting day, you might look at some food that is adding up to probably all the calories that you had the previous day, because you might only have eaten 500 or 600 calories worth of food, and thinking to yourself, how much do I want that? Some of the time you will still want it, and some of the time you won't want it. But it's about putting in that extra question rather than acting purely on the emotional internal triggers or the external triggers which are aiming to get us to buy more and consume more. Now, will this stop me falling ill? No. I am going to die of something someday. Preventing ill health is an imperfect science too. It's a numbers game. Statistically, if you're overweight, and certainly if you smoke, you're very likely to suffer ill health and possibly early death as a result. BMI, that's the body mass index that we use to see whether we might be a healthy weight, is based on statistical calculations. It's based on the population as a whole, not you individually. It's the same with a lot of the calculations that we do, things like the ratio between our height and our waist measurement. That's based on the visceral fat, which typically we might have depending on our measurement. Biomarkers, which are measurements of certain hormones and other indicators within the blood, they show the likelihood of us going on to develop things like cardiovascular disease, which are life-shortening and cause damage to our quality of life as well. But they're not individual. Maybe your genes, my genes, are on our side, and we might be the exception that proves the rule. I know, for example, that my mum's smoking was definitely implicated in one of the cancers she developed and also in the strokes that she suffered. I also know that it's not just about her behaviour. The family history of breast cancer on our side was very, very strong. Realistically, I know that the chances are I will probably develop it too at some point. In addition, on the family history side, I know that both my parents have had type 2 diabetes. Weight loss was very much about trying to avoid that too, or at least to delay it as far as possible, because we know that the amount of time that you spend living with a condition like diabetes will have an influence on the damage that it does to you. Certainly, I try and have checkups fairly regularly, and for the time being, I am avoiding the blood sugar readings, those biomarkers that show that I might be at risk of diabetes. And that for me is a really powerful indicator that fasting is working for me. At a personal level then, we can try and shift the odds in our favour, and that's a really good reason for looking at the strategies that might work for you, whether it's 5-2 intermittent fasting, whether it's 16-8, this is where you try and restrict your eating to an 8-hour window every day, so eating a bit later than normal and in the morning, and eating a bit earlier so that your body spends a much longer time not digesting food and therefore not with insulin active in the body. That's one thing that works. You might find that some of the tricks and ideas in the dirty diet work for you. I've very much tried to make that very personalised so that you can look at some of those strategies that might work, not ban any food, not feel guilty around foods. And it is very important that we look at our personal responsibility. But when it comes to the external factors, there's something else going on here. There are environmental reasons why, as populations right across the world, we are suffering this massive increase in obesity and overweight levels, not just on adults, but also in children. And my concern about that next generation is immense. Government health policies are based on statistics, so those BMI calculations, those biomarkers and so on. Governments have a responsibility to look at those and try to offer advice for the greater good. Now, as I have written books about fasting and engaged with tens of thousands of people, I have actually become a lot more political about this. I am much more concerned now about the so-called free market in food, where there is very, very little intervention at a government level across different nations in advertising, in marketing, in the messages that are pushed to us about what a healthy diet involves. This lack of intervention, I really believe now, is causing big issues for many people, especially those younger people. The rise in obesity now means that the World Health Organization sees obesity rather than starvation as the biggest issue worldwide in terms of malnutrition. You might think of malnutrition as meaning people starving, but actually it means bad nutrition. It means nutrition that is damaging people's health. Food manufacturers over the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years have managed to change our views on what we see normal eating as being. They have encouraged our natural emotional attachments to sweet food, to salty food, to fatty food, and they're using those to sell us these more processed, higher calorie foods and recipes. They've also changed our eating patterns fundamentally, so they make us feel that we should snack constantly to avoid even the briefest of hunger pangs. This applies especially with children. Parents can sometimes feel that asking a child to wait for a meal, even for an hour or two, is close to abuse. It really is not. Manufacturers care about profit. That's what the role of companies is, to deliver profit to their shareholders. But it's the government's job to care about the people who vote for them, and ultimately, in financial terms, to stop us being bankrupted by the healthcare costs of treating conditions caused and worsened by excess weight or poor diets. I really believe now that it is time for more intervention. A sugar tax that was introduced in the UK is imperfect, but at least it shows a willingness to act. But it has to be more than about taxation, because all that happens, you set a limit and people then work within that limit, and in some cases to be a little bit sneaky about it, to move just below that limit, or to find a different way of getting around it. We need to be more about positive messages, the active promotion of unprocessed foods like fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and healthy things that have got a bad name over the years. Things like eggs. Eggs for most people are a really healthy food, and yet they're still associated with health scares and cholesterol. We need to be doing more to promote the foods that work for people. There should also be much more education and work on telling people how to eat better, how to cook for themselves, and a much more rapid response in addition to research on eating and health. I also believe, and I'm not alone in this, that there should be a very high-level government department dealing solely with the national diet. During the First and Second World Wars in Britain, there was a Minister of Food appointed, and that person had the really tough job of keeping us healthy and trying to prevent malnutrition during periods of shortage. The challenge we face now is very different, but it still has that same profound implications for both the cost of our health services and for us as individuals. We don't just want to live a long life. We want to live a long, healthy life. And this is where I come back again to seeing what my mum endured towards the end of her life. It wasn't a good quality of life. I won't go into the details, but it made me realise that's not something I want for myself. It's not something I want to see for the children who are currently being affected from a very early age by type 2 diabetes and other conditions. Being healthy for as long as possible is what we should all be aiming for. We can't avoid death, but we can't avoid disease and things that might affect us through accident or through our genetic inheritance. But we can try to do things as a population that might make us healthier. And I think it's time for our government to act. I don't have all the answers. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm somebody who has had a lot now to do with people who want to lose weight, and I've looked very carefully at some of the barriers that are faced there. But what the government should be doing is bringing together a whole set of people, in fact worldwide, to look at how we can replace some of those negative, health-damaging messages with some better ones. I want to end today by talking a bit about what I'm going to be doing next. If you've been a follower of my 5-2 and Dirty Diet books, the Facebook groups, and have been listening to this podcast, you'll know how important it is to me. In the last few months, I haven't been as involved in the groups due to Mum's ill health and some other pressures, and I'm very grateful to our administration and moderation team, especially to Linda, to Nikki, Vicky, Jane, Why, and Anne. They really keep the group going. And this is where I come to the secret that many listeners, possibly including you, don't know about me. Before I became a writer about health and issues, I wrote novels. And what I've been doing in the last year or so is returning to that first love for fiction. My mum's genes come out here too. She absolutely loved reading, and books were the passion that we shared from when she first taught me to read. We are probably the only people I know that would take at least one book per day of holiday in our suitcases, adding a lot to the weight. Thank goodness for ebooks these days. So not everyone doing 5-2 knows that I started out as a novelist, and in fact I had nearly a dozen women's fiction and teenage novels published as Kate Harrison, including The Secret Shopper's Revenge, which is one of my bestsellers, but definitely the one that sold the most copies. I've now taken a turn that my mum would have appreciated, though sadly she'll never get to read the book that I've got coming out soon. It's my first thriller, The Secrets You Hide, which is going to be published under the name Kate Helm in October this year. That's October 2018 as an ebook, and then next year as a paperback. Mum absolutely loved her thrillers, most of all the crime novels. She absolutely loved those books. I hope she would have been proud of me for this one. As for Kate Helm, well, I'm publishing under a slightly different name because people might get a bit confused between the diet books and the other stuff. But Helm comes from where I live. Bright Helmstone is the old name for Brighton, down on the coast where I live and have lived for 7 really happy years. I don't know if you are a fiction reader, maybe you are. If you enjoyed the tone of my 5-2 books, which sometimes can be very personal, maybe you'd like to give it a try. I'd really love your support if you read novels and particularly thrillers. If you like books like those by Claire McIntosh and C.L. Taylor, you might enjoy these tone. This first one is about a courtroom sketch artist who tries to mess around with justice. She lives in Brighton. She's a very damaged and strange character, and it's been tremendous fun to write about her. You'll find a link in the podcast show notes to my Readers Club on my Kate Harrison website. That's kate-harrison.com, where you'll be able to win copies of the book and also signed copies of my favourite books by other amazing authors, including C.L. Taylor, Julie Cohen, and lots of others. So if you go to kate-harrison.com, you can sign up for the free club and also read an extract. And as I say, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a look because it's something that's really close to my heart. It's not always easy to promote books. And so if you've enjoyed 5-2, you might like to have a look. My 5-2 and my Dirty Diet sites are going to stay active, and the groups still offer a lot of peer support. At the moment, I've got no current plans to write a book on fasting and health, but I said the same before I wrote the Dirty Diet and was then completely caught up in the potential for combining gut and microbiome research with fasting and my own approach to eating diversely. It has had an amazing response, and I'm going to carry on adding other resources and maybe recording some issues of the podcast in future. Don't forget, of course, that the back episodes are still really useful. We've got some great interviews with people who really have changed their lives with fasting. It's not just me. And of course, the books in different editions are available worldwide. I want to finish today by thanking you so much for listening and to being a part of this, and also for listening perhaps to some of the personal thoughts I've got on this. I've actually put a photo of my mum on the website and also of the tree she sent me when I moved into our new house in Brighton. It's thriving down here, and I think of all the gardens she planted and all the patients she nursed and all of the books she read. And I want to finish by saying that I think kindness matters most. And it starts with being kind and compassionate to yourself and taking the steps that you need to be healthy and happy long term. I wish you good health and all the good times.